Welcome back to the channel, everyone. If you love captivating stories about men transforming into women in unique and fascinating ways, then be sure to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Now, let's jump right into today's tale.
Kristin pushed open the door to the Iron Kick, a well-known sports bar in the city, packed with football fans, loud cheers, and the scent of beer and fried food. The atmosphere hit her immediately. The controlled chaos of multiple games, playing on dozens of screens, the cacophony of shouting fans and clinking glasses, the energy of collective excitement that pulsed through the space like a heartbeat. She paused just inside the entrance, taking in the scene. Kyle had frequented places like this countless times, sliding into these environments with the easy anonymity of just another guy watching the game. Kristin's entrance, however, created a subtle ripple effect. A few heads turning, glances lingering a beat too long before returning to their screens. Note to self, she thought wryly, women apparently don't blend into sports bars the same way men do. Her eyes scanned the crowd, moving past clusters of jersey-wearing fans, past the long bar, where bartenders worked with choreographed efficiency, past the waitresses balancing impossibly full trays of drinks and appetizers. And she spotted Daniel immediately. He wasn't difficult to find, even in the packed establishment. Some people simply had a presence that commanded attention, a gravitational pull that made them the center of whatever space they occupied. Daniel Carter was undeniably one of those people. He was sitting at a high-top table near the bar, leaning back in his chair with that infuriatingly confident smirk. A beer in one hand, his sleeves rolled up, just enough to show off strong forearms. He wore dark jeans and a casual button-down in a deep blue that made his eyes practically glow, even from across the room. His hair was slightly tousled, less polished than his business meeting appearance, but no less appealing, perhaps even more so for the casual dishevelment. Damn, Kristin thought, momentarily frozen. This was a mistake. A very, very attractive mistake. Kristin took a breath and approached, her boots clicking against the floor. The sound was largely swallowed by the ambient noise, but she moved with a confidence that seemed to part the crowd, creating a path directly to his table. Daniel's eyes flicked to her as she neared, and for a moment his gaze lingered, slowly taking her in. Not a cursory glance, or a polite acknowledgement, but a deliberate, appreciative perusal that started at her boots, traveled unhurriedly up her legs, paused at her waist, continued past her shoulders, and finally settled on her face. Kristin felt it. The warmth in his stare. The way his lips quirked up just slightly more when he reached her face. The almost imperceptible straightening of his posture. The slight shift forward in his seat. Subtle tells that broadcast his interest more clearly than words ever could. Damn, he said, setting his beer down with a deliberate motion that seemed designed to give his hands something to do besides reach for her. You clean up nice, Thompson. His voice carried that familiar deep timbre that somehow cut through the noise of the bar, creating a pocket of intimate space between them, despite the chaos surrounding them. Kristin rolled her eyes but smirked, sliding into the moment with surprising ease. You say that, like I don't always look good. The response came automatically, a confident retort that would have been foreign to Kyle but felt natural to Kristin. The banter they'd established through texts and calls transferred seamlessly to in-person interaction, as if they'd been doing this dance for years rather than days. Daniel chuckled, the sound warm and appreciative. Fair point. But tonight, his eyes made another deliberate journey down and back up her figure. Particularly dangerous. The word choice wasn't lost on her. Dangerous, not beautiful or pretty, or any of the more conventional compliments. Dangerous implied power, suggested she was something to be reckoned with rather than merely admired. It was, she realized, exactly the right thing to say. She slid onto the stool across from him, resting her elbows on the table and leaning forward slightly, a posture that created both intimacy and a subtle showcase of her figure. Flattery already. We haven't even ordered food yet. Daniel leaned forward to match her posture, reducing the distance between them to something that flirted with the boundary between friendly and intimate. The movement brought a hint of his cologne to her, something woodsy and expensive that made her want to lean even closer. "Oh, sweetheart," he said, his voice dropping half an octave, the endearment somehow avoiding cheesiness through the sheer confidence with which he delivered it. "If you think I'm just getting started, you're in for a long night." The words hung in the air between them, charged with multiple meanings, none of them particularly subtle. A waitress approached, then thought better of interrupting and veered away, clearly reading the intensity of the exchange. Kristin's stomach flipped, a physical reaction she couldn't control. The combination of his voice, his gaze, and the deliberate double entendre created a flutter of anticipation that was both foreign and thrilling. But she refused to give him the upper hand. "Good," she shot back, eyes locking onto his with an intensity that matched his own. "I like a long night." She let the pause linger just enough to emphasize the innuendo, her voice dropping to match his lower register. Two could play at this game, and she was discovering that Kristin was surprisingly adept at it. Daniel exhaled slowly, shaking his head with a low chuckle that rumbled in his chest. His eyes never left hers. The blue somehow darker now, like the ocean during a storm. "Your trouble." It wasn't an accusation, but an appreciation, delivered with a mixture of surprise and delight, as if he'd discovered something unexpected and valuable. Kristin grinned, feeling a surge of power that was intoxicating in its novelty. Kyle had never experienced this particular dynamic, the heady rush of knowing someone was attracted to you and using that knowledge deliberately, skillfully. "You love it." Guilty as charged, Daniel admitted without a hint of shame. He raised his beer in a small toast before taking a sip, his eyes never leaving hers over the rim of the glass. "Though I should warn you, I give as good as I get." "I'm counting on it," Kristin replied, the words out before she could censor them. "Otherwise, what's the point?" A server finally braved the intensity of their exchange, approaching with a professional smile. "Can I get you something to drink?" "Whatever he's having," Kristin replied, without looking away from Daniel, maintaining the connection between them. "Another Founders all day, Ipe." Daniel confirmed to the server, "And menus when you get a chance." When the server departed, Daniel leaned back slightly, though the intensity of his focus remained unchanged. "So, Thompson, ready to watch your team get crushed tonight?" The shift to football talk was both a reprieve from the charged flirtation and a continuation of it, moving to safer ground while maintaining the underlying competitive dynamic. "Interesting strategy," Kristin observed, grateful for the opportunity to gather herself. "Trying to dampen my spirits before the game even starts? That reeks of fear, Carter." "Psychological warfare," Daniel corrected with a grin. "Setting expectations low so when your quarterback throws his inevitable third-quarter interception, you're already prepared for disappointment." "My quarterback has the lowest interception rate in the league," Kristin countered, easily slipping into football analysis mode, a comfortable territory for both Kyle and Kristin. "Your defensive line, on the other hand, has more holes than Swiss cheese." "Ouch." Daniel winced in mock pain, placing a hand over his heart. "Starting with the personal attacks already. I thought we'd at least make it through appetizers before the gloves came off." "Consider it a preview," Kristin replied with a smirk. "I believe in setting accurate expectations for the evening." In that case, Daniel leaned forward again, his voice dropping back to that dangerous lower register. "Let me set some expectations of my own. I intend to win our bet, thoroughly enjoy watching you admit defeat, and then possibly convince you to extend this evening well beyond the final whistle. How's that for transparency?" The server returned with Kristin's beer, placing it on a coaster in front of her. "Ready to order food?" "Give us a minute," Daniel replied without looking away from Kristin. We're still negotiating terms. When they were alone again, Kristin took a deliberate sip of her beer, using the moment to compose her response. The taste was hoppy and complex, not what Kyle would have typically chosen, but pleasing to Kristin's more refined palate. Confident, aren't you? She finally said, setting her glass down. Though I should warn you, I'm not easily convinced of anything. You'll have to bring your A game, Carter. I wouldn't dream of bringing anything less, he replied, his expression shifting to something more sincere despite the playful tone. Not for you. The simple statement, delivered without artifice, caught her off guard. Beneath the flirtation and banter was a glimpse of something more genuine, an actual interest that went beyond the verbal sparring they'd been engaged in. Well, Kristin said, raising her glass in a small toast of her own, may the best team win. And after that, Daniel added, clinking his glass against hers, maybe we both can. The charged moment was interrupted by a roar from the crowd as something happened on one of the many screens. Neither of them looked away to see what had caused the commotion, too caught up in their own private game, one with stakes that suddenly felt much higher than any football match. As the game started, their conversation quickly turned to football and fantasy leagues. The massive screens around the bar displayed the players in larger-than-life detail, every tackle and pass magnified as fans around them cheered and groaned with each play. The energy in the Iron Kick was infectious, a collective emotional roller coaster that rose and fell with each down. Kristin found herself settling into a comfortable rhythm with Daniel, their banter flowing as easily in person as it had over text and phone calls. They ordered a massive platter of wings, extra hot for me, medium for the lady, Daniel had specified, to which Kristin had immediately corrected. Extra hot for both of us, unless you're scared of a little spice, Carter. And a second round of beers. During a commercial break, as they both reached for napkins after demolishing half the wing platter, Daniel wiped his hands with deliberate care and fixed Kristin with that knowing smirk that somehow managed to be both irritating and attractive. So, Daniel said, taking a sip of his beer, his eyes never leaving hers over the rim of the glass, I looked at your fantasy team. The casual admission caught Kristin off guard. You what? Your fantasy team, he repeated, setting his glass down. Thompson's Titans, right. I pulled up your stats. Kristin raised a brow, somewhat impressed by his research skills. Oh, and? Daniel's smirk widened, transforming into a full-blown grin that promised trouble. He leaned back in his chair, the picture of casual confidence as he delivered his verdict. It's trash. The blunt assessment, delivered with such cheerful certainty, made Kristin gasp dramatically, placing a hand over her chest in mock offense. How dare you? My team is currently undefeated. Luck, Daniel dismissed with a wave of his hand. Pure, unadulterated beginner's luck. Your strength of schedule is weaker than watered-down beer, says the man who drafted a tight end in the second round, Kristin countered, surprising herself with how quickly the retort came to her. Kyle had always been passionate about fantasy football, and apparently that knowledge had transferred seamlessly to Kristin. Bold strategy? Cotton. Let's see if it pays off. Daniel's eyebrows shot up, clearly impressed by her awareness of his draft choices. You've been doing your homework too, I see. Know thy enemy, Kristin replied, with a sweet smile that didn't match the competitive glint in her eye. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. I'm pretty sure Sun Tzu wasn't talking about fantasy football. Daniel chuckled. All warfare is based on deception, Kristin quoted, taking a deliberate sip of her beer. Seems applicable to me. Daniel leaned in, his forearms resting on the table, closing the distance between them to something more intimate, despite the crowded bar surrounding them. His eyes held a challenge that sent a little thrill through her. You seriously think your running backs are going to carry you through the season? The question was direct, a pointed attack on what Kyle had always considered his team's greatest strength. Kristin felt a flash of defensive pride, both Kyle's and her own, rising to the surface. Kristin huffed, wiping a bit of wing sauce from the corner of her mouth with deliberate slowness, noting how Daniel's eyes tracked the movement. My running backs are solid. Thompson has the highest yards after contact in the league. Maybe if this was 3 seasons ago. Daniel shook his head, signaling the server for another round. Thompson's dealing with a lingering ankle issue that the team isn't publicly acknowledging. Inside information, he added with a wink. And Williams, please. 1 hit away from retirement. How do you know about Thompson's ankle? Kristin demanded, genuinely curious. This was information even Kyle hadn't been privy to. Daniel tapped the side of his nose conspiratorially. I have sources. Fantasy football isn't just a game for me, Thompson. It's a strategically executed campaign. Of course it is. Kristin rolled her eyes, though she was secretly impressed by his dedication. Let me guess. Spreadsheets? Algorithms? Probably a dedicated Slack channel with your buddies. Mock all you want, Daniel replied with a grin, but my methods have resulted in 3 championship wins in the last 5 years. Beginner's luck. Kristin threw his words back at him with a sweet smile. 5 years isn't beginner territory, he countered. It is when you're playing against me. She shot back without missing a beat. Daniel's eyes lit up with that competitive spark that seemed to intensify their connection, an almost tangible charge in the air between them. Big talk from someone whose quarterback is about to face the league's top pass rush next week. Kristin narrowed her eyes, leaning forward to match his posture, close enough now that she could detect the faint trace of his cologne beneath the scent of wing sauce and beer. All right, Carter. Let's make this interesting. The suggestion hung between them, loaded with possibility. Daniel tilted his head, curiosity and interest plain on his face. Go on. Around them, the bar erupted in cheers as someone scored a touchdown, but neither of them looked away from each other, too caught up in their own private competition. If my team finishes the season higher than yours, she said, crossing her arms beneath her chest in a move that was both challenging. She noted with a flash of feminine awareness, flattering to her figure. You take me anywhere I want, on your dime. Any restaurant, any city, no budget limits. Daniel's eyes darkened with interest, his smirk taking on a new quality. Something hungrier, more intent. And if I win? There was a moment, just a heartbeat, where Kristin almost hesitated. Kyle would have considered the odds, weighed the potential loss, maybe suggested a more balanced wager. But Kristin felt a surge of reckless confidence, a desire to push this flirtation to its limits. Kristin leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping into something dangerously smooth, almost purring. Then I'll do whatever you want. The words hung in the air between them, charged with implication. The double entendre was impossible to miss, deliberate in its ambiguity yet clear in its suggestion. Daniel's expression shifted. The playful challenge in his eyes turned into something darker, more intense, just for a second. A flash of genuine desire, unmasked and raw before he controlled it. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his breathing visibly changing rhythm. Kristin felt it, a pulse of something undeniable between them. Not just attraction or chemistry, but a recognition, a moment where the pretense of casual flirtation dropped away to reveal something more primitive and honest. The air between them seemed to thicken, the noise of the bar receding until it felt like they were alone in a bubble of tension, everything else peripheral and unimportant. Then he grinned, masterfully recalibrating the moment back to playful territory, though the intensity remained in his eyes. Careful, Thompson. That's a dangerous bet. His voice had dropped to that lower register. that seemed designed specifically to send shivers down her spine, a tactical deployment of vocal seduction that was annoyingly effective. Kristin smirked back, refusing to back down, even as her heart rate picked up pace. "What's the matter? Afraid you'll lose?" "Not a chance," Daniel chuckled, the sound rich and confident. "I just want to make sure you know what you're getting yourself into." "I always know exactly what I'm doing," Kristin replied, the assertion far more confident than she actually felt, but delivered with perfect conviction. "Then let's make it official." Daniel extended his hand across the table, his expression a mixture of challenge and anticipation. They shook on it, his warm, firm grip lingering just a second too long. His thumb brushed across her knuckles in a gesture that was definitely not part of a standard handshake, a deliberate caress that sent a jolt of electricity up her arm. "To the best team," Daniel said, releasing her hand and raising his beer in a toast. "May the odds be ever in my favor," Kristin countered, clinking her glass against his. "Hunger Games references now," Daniel laughed. "You're full of surprises, Thompson." "You have no idea," she replied, the words carrying more truth than he could possibly understand. As they turned their attention back to the game on screen, Kristin couldn't help but wonder what she'd just gotten herself into. A bet with stakes that carried implications far beyond fantasy football, a wager that seemed to acknowledge and accelerate whatever was happening between them. And the most surprising part, she wasn't regretting it one bit.